here this evening as part of the Health for a Green New Deal launch gathering for this wonderful evening of poetry for climate justice with the incredible Sarah, Lasoye and Selina and Nwulu. We are in for an absolute treat this evening. We're going to hear first from Sarah and then for Selina, and then they're going to both be in conversation, reflecting on their work. So first of all, we are going to hear from Sarah Lasoye, who is a poet and writer from London. She is an alumna of the Barbican Young Poets and a current member of Octavia, poetry collective for women of colour. Her debut chapbook, Phobia, ages ago, is forthcoming with Hajar Press in just a couple of weeks. So it is so exciting to have you with us. Take it away.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, everybody. What a lovely introduction. Yeah, it's such a joy to be here with everybody after what I'm sure has been such a great day with so many great conversations, so many speakers I admire. And yeah, I'm really happy to contribute in the way that I can, which is with poems. And to be reading alongside Selina is just like a joy. So I'm gonna start by reading a poem that I always kind of read up top, just to remind myself like why I like poetry, and like it's kind of, I think, a good palate cleanser, appetizer, one of those things. So this is Poetry Has Broken the Back. Poetry has broken the back of my voice. Craft a bowl from spine, like lifted hands waiting for something to fall into them. Poetry is taping postcards to hotel room walls. I'm dizzy. I'm watching a film in a language I don't understand, and I'm watching my hands write subtitles. I'm falling asleep on my phone. I'm speaking into my hands. I'm sweetening my tea with baby teeth. I'm wringing out the last of a cold sweat. I'm lighting a candle at both ends, and the candle is me, and the waiting center is me, and the glowing wicks are me. I'm a light. So the prompt, I guess, like the brief for this is like poetry for climate justice. And in my like email exchanges with both Ben and Selina, I quickly realized I don't have poems that explicitly discuss climate justice. But what I do have is like a lot of work that I think speaks to kind of a sense of political commitment, which is what I have, and I know that a lot of you also will do, and also a sense of community and imagining what's possible beyond the confines of this world and how it's currently socially organized. So imagine this is my excuse for not having climate justice poems. But the next two that I'm going to read are kind of connected in that, and I just let Selina know this before we started, that the first was actually written for a competition that was back in 2015. So I was a baby poet, like just trying my hand. And it was for a competition that the Free Word Centre, which are an arts organisation in London, held in the run-up to the Paris Climate Conference, I think, at the end of 2015. And it was titled "The Time Is Now." And I submitted a poem to that competition off the theme of, okay, the time is now. How do we, I don't know, think about taking action in a meaningful way on climate justice? And Selina was one of the judges for that competition, which is a brilliant full circle moment. So I reread back that poem and thought to myself, in the kindest terms, I have changed as a poet. Do you know what I mean? Growth. But at the same time, I noticed a connection between another poem of mine. And I think because they're both concerned with the kind of anxious collective, the kind of like worry about how we take action and what we sacrifice if we sacrifice anything. So I'm going to read them in like one after the other. So the first is "The Time Is Now," and the second is "Way Out Tale." The time is now. This life spans broad. Her wings sprawl and she clasps her nails into all that she can, clinging and digging and growing with all that we can, toenails form and bones grow and hips displace and hairlines chase something that we can't see coming. And then we fall beneath. Finally, we peel and pry our fingers out and away from the earth. But at least we overlap, right? We give way to youth so that on our descent, they can make our amends, leaping to rise from the pit that we dug for those reasons we forgot so long ago. But it is easy to believe that people can rise from ashes when all you've ever done is start fires in your own home. It's easy to avert eyes and place faith in blind hope. It's less easy to build bridges from splinters and venture across the great pit below. Way out, tail. We're way out in the wilderness now, way, way out. And our souls have never been this hot, like a sound and a color and a smell. And our palms have been made to open, slow, like the word wound, by the bark, by the climbing, by the cold, by its appetite. And what will we do when it gets real bad and our hands can't hold any longer? One of us says, I guess we amputate, at least they aren't the parts that we need to. One of us walks off. One of us says, well, what happens then? What happens when it's our throats? The hunter diffused into the air around us? What happens when it's our friends and we can no longer sound the low threat of a swarm? What happens when, neatly then, the soreness calls for us, a dart to the neck? We hang our young high up on the branches. We find a cove, we tighten into it. We sleep like a pile and we sleep like a hole in the ground. Cool, so hopefully you get a sense of the growth that has happened there. So the next poems that I'm going to read are all really short. There are 3 short poems that I wrote over the course of this year that we've all been kind of inside. And for a lot of the stuff that I've written, not much of it has lengthened. I feel like they've all stayed at the length that I started them off as. And these were really short things. And I just realized that I think they all go together around a kind of sense of care, or like how you take care of yourself, your brain, your mind in this world, not even this specific time. So I'll read those together now. 1, wayfinding. My head is a bowling ball. My job has 3 fingers in my brain, and I pray for the day this pendulum life cuts loose and I soar away, up at first and then down with speed and air through the holes in my head, fast towards the obstacles and the dark. 2, I want the rain. The rain is at the window and the wind is under, over, around it, so the drops have no shared direction, but they press together towards my wanting, face behind the glass. Retreat. You can only do so much. 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 See? Even sentences aren't sure what they mean anymore. You let the stew and its thick, rich work go on a little longer. Feel the heat rise and draw together, steam against the sunless skylight. Cecile McLaurin-Salvant sings St. Louis Gal, and oh, how you listen, body taken into the swirl and flood of this night's warm savor. Retreat, it tells you, for as long as this slow burning match will endure. Cool. I'm just checking how much time I have. So I'm gonna try and read a couple more. And maybe, I'm gonna read the one that is actually about climate justice, which, I feel like the beginning was a fake, like, oh, maybe she won't have any poems, but here we are. So this one is about climate justice in a sense, and I hope you guys like it. So it's called Manifesto. No eviction here. No eviction here. Statues, cop cars, the limbs of monarchy and military, straight into the sea that will enliven itself, growing greener by way of smiling back, a little nod our way. What will we do now? How will we live now? Will be a cause for celebration, that we can even ask those questions, no longer in abstraction. No eviction here, no rent, no real estate agents, no real estate, land back and settlers dealt with. Nothing will be missed. Not the old maps or the high rises. Nothing will be missed, not private gardens, not any kind of fanciful line drawn in the air. Nothing will be missed. Not global health governance or the professionalization of international development. Nothing will be missed. Not people yelling, the time is now, to people for whom this is not their first apocalypse. If this is your first apocalypse, if this is your first crisis, welcome. If this is your first apocalypse, if this is your first crisis, no, it's not. Nothing will be missed. Not compromise, not capitulation, not 40% reduction in blah, blah by 20 whatever. Nothing will be missed. Not the American Army brat in your global health seminar telling you to respect Bill and Melinda Gates. Nothing will be missed. Not Black people as objects of the natural world. Not human remains in natural history museums. In fact, maybe the natural world, capital N, capital W, will have to fall too. Nothing will be missed. Not the guest speaker on a module on conflict and humanitarian action, whose CV charts weapons targeting in the US Air Force to working for the British Red Cross. Not the guest speaker instructing students to imagine ourselves as US soldiers, to guess which people in the images we're shown we would be legally permitted to kill under international humanitarian law. Nothing will be missed, not least the academy. Nothing will be missed. Not the demolition of social housing with people still inside, not state-sanctioned anything. Nothing will be missed. Not social death, no. In the new world, I'll know every language but that one. Me, I've taken the batteries out of every clock I can find. No more ticking. On God, I don't have a craft anymore. I have 2 hands and a resolve that's hardened over 24 years. I won't miss that heavy thing either. Sickness makes you bare, and this world makes us sick, so it makes us bare. In the new world, like everyone, I will have given something up, because we will all have had to give something up. Willingly or not, it will be prized from our hands. Either way, it is capital. And it won't be neat or pretty or tidy or polite. It'll happen slowly, like it is now, and then all at once. It will be chaos, because that's what transformation is. One chaos requires another to be undone. And don't get me wrong, me too, I'll have to go into the sea. I'll go willingly. I'll pack up this version of me, the version that thinks it has nothing to apologize for, and jump straight off the nearest coastline, leaving a version of me I can't even imagine yet behind. She'll wave, watching herself float down, and there'll be no sound as the sea gulps her right up. So, thank you guys. I know I'm running over time, so I'm just going to read the last one, which circles back around to community and joy, although all of them kind of have that through them. And it's going to be in the chat book, plug, which you guys should get. And it's called After the Reading. And it's just about that feeling of, remember when you could go to a reading or like something in the evening after work or uni, and you just see your friends there, and you'd like just be like, okay, can we sneak a free glass of red wine even though it's only for the speaker? Can we like chat about what meeting we're going to meet at next? Like all of that stuff that comes with doing things and organizing with people in an embodied way. Like I miss that so much. And this poem hopefully speaks to that. So I'll end there. Thank you guys so much as well for listening to me. Okay, yeah, After the Reading, after Poem for My Love by June Jordan. How do we come to be here next to each other in the night, where there are stars that show us to our love inevitable? After the reading or the debrief or the in-conversation, when it is summer and by some juicy miracle, we are all still unbruised, dangling from our branches, near bursting our own flesh, we bottleneck the doorway and baptize the street. Abandon the day's serious feeling after the reading or the debrief or the in-conversation, because despite being born into the slick arms of alienation, we are all still unbruised, dangling from our branches, without memory of a time when outside was safe. Put simply, when you realize you are only a lapse of time long enough to be given a name, there is no use in thinking of capacity or tomorrow. After the reading or the debrief or the in-conversation, one house read forgets you your watch. You mumble something like, "Isn't it wild how babies hiccup in the womb? Isn't that sad?" We are all still unbruised, dangling from our branches, black and plural under a choral sky. We circle back to the topic of us, wanting everything, after the reading or the debrief or the in-conversation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Sarah. Getting loads and loads of love in the chat, on the screens. That was, as people have shared, fire, mind-blowing, incredible, just really, really wonderful. Thank you so, so much, Sarah. Yeah, maybe just invite everyone, just take a moment and breathe it in, because yeah, that was really beautiful. We are now going to be joined by Selina Nwulu, who is a writer, poet, and essayist with a commitment to social and climate justice. Her poetry and essays have been widely published in a variety of journals, short films, and anthologies, including the critically acclaimed anthology New Daughters of Africa. Her work has been translated into Spanish, Greek, and Polish, exhibited on the Warsaw Metro and in New York. She was Young Poet Laureate for London 2015 to 16, an award that showcases literary talent across the capital, and she was shortlisted for the Brunel International African Poetry Prize in 2019. She is also a 2021 Arts Award finalist for environmental writing, and she is incredible, and we're really, really grateful for Selina for joining this evening. So thank you so much, Selina, and over to you.
Thank you so much. Oh, and thank you, Sarah, for that. I really enjoyed hearing you and the evolution of that poem. And yeah, like looking forward to chatting to you about all of that. And it's great to be here. And I was at the talks, 2 of the talks today, and, you know, really like valued the conversations that were had and you know, think that some of my poems really do speak to a lot of the topics that came up today. So the first poem I wanted to read is a poem that I wrote a while ago, and it kind of keeps on becoming, you know, more and more relevant. And I suppose for some artists that's quite gratifying to feel like you're current, but if you're like socially motivated, then it can be quite depressing. You know, you kind of want to feel like you've gotten beyond the injustice that you've written about. But this feels bittersweet in that I keep on coming back to this poem because it keeps on being more and more relevant. And so this is called Home is a Hostile Lover. And in it, it charts a journey starting in Nigeria and, you know, charting a journey across several sites of injustice. And then we end up in a country not dissimilar to the UK. So this is called Home is a Hostile Lover. Remember when our delta waters were clean, how we washed our faces in rivers and chased fish with our bare hands. Remember, before delta had its throat slit and bled its oily pipes into soil, when we hummed words into water and it would laugh and sing back. Noose. We are burning alive in this village. The oil pipes spew open like bowels and stain our homeland with curses. Our mouths have become coated in oil. Drops make liquid nooses around our necks and our words buried and left for remains. We will never speak the same again. Eaton. Look how obese the ocean has become. The waves ingest my fertile land vicious and devour my home to its bones. The ocean leaves its offcuts when sated, and I am left and off a half-lit emblem. Tell me, where does one turn to when their home becomes a hostile lover? Sinking. They're all sinking in the Mediterranean Sea. Our borders have become dense and long, and their ships have burst into splints. The sea is bloated with people's limbs. Their memories did not make it either. They're all sinking in the Mediterranean Sea. Watch how the bubbles float and pop. Funeral. Does my alarm clock wake me, or the nightmares? I often cannot tell. Both remind me of a lonely funeral. I share a room with strangers. We breathe in damp and each other's lungs. We are wheezers who will not complain. We are still sinking on dry land. Future. I work long to send money home, for they are sure of the future here. At home, everything is on quicksand, so we speak in the present tense, for home is an exposed nerve waiting. I work long here, sending my money, hoping to send the future back home. Danger. You tell me to save the planet, to reduce my carbon footprint, buy local, and to turn my lights off. My footprints are not wanted here. I buy, but you think I steal. I am afraid of what darkness might bring. You speak like I don't know danger. So this next poem is about Blackness, and specifically Black masculinity and the softness of Black masculinity in a hostile environment. And you know, as well as climate justice, I also think about race and migration, and obviously the links between all of them. But this more focuses more on the race and migration side of of things. And it's based on some time I spent a few years ago in Senegal, in Dakar. And so this is called Wakam Beach, Dakar 2019. You do not fight the sun at its fiercest, rather bow down to its gift and rest. I discover this on the beach in Dakar, surrounded by newfound uncles, fishermen stopping for lunch who have made me a passerby a plate without asking. My strangeness is no threat, but a novelty, and I am enjoying the company of men I do not fear, but could even love. They offer attire and instructions for who I should marry. Their advice loud and frolicking like waves, at odds and in sync with each other's rhythm. I do not resist, but swim in them, allow myself to be swept from one wisecrack to another. I am in awe of how much the landscape wants them, extends its hospitality through the sun, its rays an opening blossom, seeking only to fortify their blackness, the two-tier blue of sea and sky, and its ability to illuminate the contours of their silhouettes, how their feet, beach ashen and shallow buried, become roots as the sand surrenders to the weight of them. When conversation turns to where I live, whether they should move or send a son first, I watch a question mark permeate each brow. I want them to stay here in this moment, though I have no right to say it, perhaps to even think it. But I know uncles who live under grey skies, their skin ghosting for every bitter month. The way the landscape turns each uncle into a warning, a hard body brute with hands considered too big. I imagine how the timbre of their voices might sound delayed, echoing through choppy telephone signal as if passing through the oceans themselves, how they might parrot, everything is well, no right to complain. A third of the money they would live on, sending most of it back home. And I remember the first time I saw my father back in Nigeria, how much lighter he looked. I didn't recognize who he was. So the next poem is called People of the Corn. And I think, when we think about extraction and climate injustice, we often think about it in a material way. So whether it's the land or kind of material resource or bodies that have kind of been sacrificed. I know that earlier we talked about this idea of whose bodies are sacrificed. It can often be quite material. And this poem really thinks about culture and heritage and memory that is also often lost. And I was really interested when I was reading about Mexico and the resistance they've had against global agrochemical companies with GM corn, and how have been fighting to preserve their corn because it holds deep cultural, spiritual resonance, so much so that they are called the people of the corn. And so I wanted to think about that kind of violence, which I don't think necessarily gets as much consideration as the material, more kind of tangible violence. But I wanted to think about that in this poem, which is called People of the Corn. You tell me you were born on a kaleidoscope of maize, ears of black, blue, grey, purple, green, and red. 59 types of wonder, each with a colour and shape to suit its own mood. Some are too shy to stand up to rough winds. Others tame a soil gently, will alkalize its acidic tongue. You tell me your maize is a kitchen, feeds you when others will not, gives you tamales, gorditas, tostadas, chiaquiles, new words to me, like a rich dark chocolate swirling in my mouth. How then to understand them disrobed, as if left shriveled under a microscope? You tell me GM corn is a lonely laboratory of yellow and white. It brings you no canarios, too dull to be held towards the sky in praise. It knows how to grow, but without listening, you do not recognize its voice. So this next poem, I'm really interested in how language evolves with the times that we're living in. And I think we've seen that, we've gone from, climate change to climate crisis, climate devastation, and our terms of reference are changing with increasing urgency as our situation becomes increasingly urgent. But, I think maintaining the argument that in many parts of the world, it's always been urgent. So who sets that agenda, I think I digress. But anyway, so I'm interested in other words that are kind of coming out to reflect, our changing realities. And so the word solastalgia was something that I was really interested in. And again, the evolution of our conversation, now we're talking about climate grief. And so that's, speaks to this word for those who've not come across it. Solastalgia is a homesickness. It's a nostalgia to our natural environment that is irreparably changed. So, our relationship to the place after the flood, after the drought, and that the loss of that. And so I wanted to think about that in this poem, and also to try and connect. I think our capitalist system would seek to divide us from our lived environment. And in this piece, I'm trying to kind of connect us and our bodies to the places that we live in, and the effect that might have on us as the places we live in change. So this is solastalgia. What solace can be found from living in a crumbling skeleton? Ghost towns and villages that have lost their skins to the atmosphere. It is grief that will turn us into living memorials of our fallen landscapes. Given we do not yet have words for the eulogy, we might well embody our loss. Like this, we will become a drought when there is no clean water, our skin parched like abandoned land, faces dull and ready for wildfire. When the crops fail, our limbs will wilt like stalks giving up, our hair imitate the weeds. It is perhaps the earthquakes that will crack open our chests, help us understand how we, the living, show love in the aftershocks. And so this last poem that I'm going to read, he carries on with this idea of interconnection. And so I was really inspired by a quote by Dr. Vandana Shiva, who many will be familiar with, I'm sure, and her quote, which is, everything is connected. The idea that everything is this hard matter, unrelated to each other, is still guiding a lot of science, old patriarchal stuff. Excuse me. The real science is the science of interconnection, of non-separation, that everything is related. And so this is called Everything is Everything. My mother taught me that one hand washes the other, two dancers moving instinctively into the shape of each other, fingers mirroring and intertwining underwater. So then, let us understand how we all move together, how a seed has to know the soil to become itself, the way many crops only ripen into bud when a bee seeks them. The rain must come, as must the sun, the weather offering a lesson in what it means to persevere in both shadow and in light. All this tended by a farmer's wisdom, learning just when to sow, rear, pluck. We are eating from a whole world, and we, once a seed, return back to the earth, giving life to the soil, and who knows what might grow in our memory. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selina. That was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
And yeah, loads of love on the screens and in the chat box. So just, yeah, thank you so much, and a huge virtual round of applause for both Selina and Sarah for just wonderful, beautiful poetry. We're now gonna, I think you're all spotlighted. I'm gonna go away into the background and just open up a space for both of you to reflect and on those connections and intersections with your work. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you. I loved hearing you as well.
Oh man, I just I'm sorry. I know we have questions though, but I think the way that also you pull us into this collective we, like it's only something I've recently started doing, but to think about how I felt so involved in everything you were saying, like I just think, man, it's just
thank you.
Thank you.
And also for me, I was just like, but I see a lot of this like linking to climate change, climate justice, you know, especially the last one, but just generally, because I think that's something that, you know, thinking about broadening what climate change looks like, what climate change feels and sounds like, it's so important. And I don't think that we need to necessarily like write poems that like use that language. I think that that's actually more of a hindrance a lot of the time. And so actually like understanding what you're saying through a climate justice perspective, I think I could definitely do that for sure and enjoy that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna ask you the first question around language, and just like, so the language we use when we discuss climate justice, like you were saying, is very prescribed a lot of the time, and like, you know, we feel, or some poets might feel like it has its own kind of mechanics to be discussed using, or maybe some of the language is so also removed from certain poets. If you're a Black poet, maybe you can't really engage with the kind of ways, or even just the architecture of the discussion, like how the discussion is being framed.
Yes.
So how do you see like the way that you use language to discuss climate justice being maybe outside of that, or different, or taking parts, or, you know, creating something entirely new to suit your poetics in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the architecture, that, like, I can't remember exactly what you said, but the architecture of the situation, I think, is really well put, because I think it is that, and I think you have to start where people are at, and I think especially for, you know, communities who are particularly oppressed, Black and brown people, it can feel like a privilege to think about climate change because of the way it's been structured. But if you start with people's lives, like state violence, you know, is a climate change issue. Like the you know, your quality of housing, your access to green spaces, the food that you eat, you know, the fact that, you know, to be part of the diaspora, and you know, the food that we eat, are we always going to be able to access that? Like, that is a climate change issue. And I'm pretty sure if you told someone that they're not going to be able to get plantain anymore, they're involved in that conversation
very quickly. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so so for me, I don't buy it. I think it's an agenda that hasn't been set with us, and so it's very easy to say that, you know, we're not interested. But I think that the framing, to your expression, the architecture of it has been wrong for a broader conversation. And I think that's where the issue is, and that's why I am interested in writing about it and broadening it out to include those perspectives.
Yeah. And like, I mean, in one of your poems, you discuss like the interconnectedness of, like you were saying, all issues that relate to our lives as complex individual people, being what the mission is, being what we're organizing around and towards. All of it has to be included. And I think that's like what my qualm is, like, with those discussions sometimes, when we have like just people being, I think I say it in one of my poems, like people saying the time, it's never been more urgent than it is now. And I'm like, for whom though?
Yeah.
For you maybe, but it's been urgent for a lot of us for a long time.
Exactly.
And or like even, yeah, I mean, just lots of different ways that people conceptualize like crisis, the idea of crisis.
100%.
Use language to define it in a way that like excludes or even like erases or like just at least obfuscates like what else is going on concurrently to what they're discussing too. So
I think that's it, and I think that's kind of what I was kind of thinking of when I was talking about even the progression of terms that we've seen to describe the climate change, climate crisis, all of that. It becomes a crisis when, you know, a report comes out and calls it that. But actually, when, you know, communities across the world have been talking about this being a crisis, that the language hasn't necessarily changed really. You know, I guess in the global north, let's say, because, you know, people have been calling it crisis from day one. And also, you know, in this country as well, like, you know, again, I think we're seeing that a lot in the pandemic, of like that actually many communities are already living in crisis. And so, you know, the language that's been used, the urgency that's been used, we're seeing, so it can happen and changes can happen. But when, you know, working class Black and brown communities have been calling out for it, you know, there's the disbelief. So I think that the language is really a mirror to, you know, how seriously these things are taken. And so I find it really interesting, also, you know, discouraging and sometimes, but like interesting to see that.
Definitely. And sorry, I know we have other questions, but when you said that, I was like, yeah, because especially around COVID as well, I think what has irked me, and a few people have written about this, but like how, you know, when we talk about, okay, all of these other social fractures and like real concern that why am I calling it social fractures? Systems of oppression that have been at play for like however long. When we're noting how, okay, that is exacerbating issues, making new issues arise, like making specific sites of experiences for people who've always been marginalized. The way it's discussed sometimes is like as if that characteristic, and it's always individualized, like race as a comorbidity, like, oh, it's you're just, you know, it means that you're more disposed to this thing that we're all disposed to, like we're exposed to. And I don't think that's really it, because it's like what you say, it's like the language then makes it conceptualizes it for us that like race is not its own, or racism rather is not its own catastrophe, apocalypse, you know. That's just, you know, another lens that is adding to the thing that we're all experiencing, which is COVID, which is devastating, of course, and we've seen the disparities, but like I think it when it is talked about in this way of just like an addition, you know, we like, it's a misunderstanding of intersectionality when people are like, okay, it's just you layer it on. It's like, no,
Yeah.
there's completely new side of experience. That's like what, you know. So yeah.
I also think we've seen that within, like, you know, hashtag BLM and all of that. It's like, you know, what has been, more people are talking about it, but actually, you know, many of us have been saying this for so long. So what has changed that now, you know, we're able to say, you know, white privilege, or, you know, all of that, like, without the kind of gasp and the collective clutch of pearls. Like, who is allowing that? Because, you know, my language hasn't changed. It's just maybe a tiny little bit more, you know, like well received. I don't know if well received is the word, but, you know, than it was, say, a year, 2 years ago. And so who, you know, gets to call something an emergency? Who gets to call something a crisis? How does language allow for these terms to be, you know, expressed? And I guess, what is our role in trying to push that forward? I don't have big answers to this, but I just, these are the things that I kind of think about. I'm very good at these questions. I don't know about answering them.
I love to pose a question.
Yeah, put it out there, just let it flow.
That's not my job. That's other people's job.
Get back to me. Yeah. So I would love to ask you about, you know, like, I think obviously Manifesto was this thing about like envisioning and reimagining and what we've left behind and all of that. But I also think that, you know, that the 3 poems that you read, and other ones as well, were very much rooted in the here and now. So I'm wondering, like, how you balance this kind of your writing to speak to our day-to-day experiences, especially around community and care, but then also the importance of like reimagining new futures, and how you kind of find the balance within that.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of my writing just comes out of like quite journalistic stuff. So it does start very insularly, and it is more so like the 3 kind of fragments, thinking about what's happened in my day-to-day, what's an interesting image that will replay in my mind, and like I'll just write those down and then see how they piece together and maybe call that a poem, because that's what I can do as a poet. But then like with thinking about like how to like tend to the world like beyond the inside of my head, I think I do. It's something that I think is my next big question to ask myself, because like I said, like I haven't explicitly written about a lot of things to do with the world at large in my poems before. And I think out of a kind of like worry about getting it wrong in a way that like, I think with putting my poet hat on is very specific experience, a lot for like women poets, a lot for like marginalized poets and stuff. So I, you know, what in this like part of the reason we had this, there was this whole thing around like, oh, you know, there are so many women who are encouraged to write memoir because that's like you're an authority on your own life but nothing else. So I think that's like why I've tended to do that, and I'm trying to unpack that and be a bit more able to just be like, and another thing about the world, because I am like that in my day-to-day, and I, you know, I have deep political commitments, and I organize, and I want to usher in this world that we're all always talking about and writing towards as well. But in poetry, it's hard. I think it's just me realizing that is something I can and should do. And Manifesto was like, me being like,
it was wicked.
And another thing.
I mean, to that, I would also just challenge that as well, because I think it is a very masculine, you know, outlook to say that like things that are political or socially driven have to be like, I don't know what is, but you know what I mean?
Right.
But actually, like, you know, you can write about your own life and that be deeply political. And you're, you know, like, it's the micro and the macro. So even what you say can be so universal and have so many political undertones, and that can be backed up by the work that you do, by your commitment. You know, I was recently asked, like, you know, a question, like in an interview about like, do you are you always going to write about political things? And I was just like, well, it really just depends on your perspective, because I can write about a love story, right? And, you know, how that couple met, the power dynamics within that relationship, if they're a same-sex couple, how they feel comfortable to navigate in the world, that is inherently political to me. That is still a political story.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily that you have to then go, and write the heavy factual stuff to then have the weight of it being like political. And so I think that is also, something that feels like that we've inherited, that we also have to work through, that like you like your life is inherently political. Writing about your life is inherently political.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. And that's, drag me, absolutely. I think that at the start of, when I started writing poems, this is what a lot of the people who I really admire would say to me as well, and remind me to just think about that in the back of my mind. Because, the second part of your question is around like, okay, how do you use poems, or how can poems be useful for a political imagination as well? And I think, I did realize, okay, also external influence, not many, I think I was pushing back against like how people were like, you should be expected to write about politics, capital P, if you look like me, do you know what I mean? And you can't just write about the grass or like a crush you had or whatever.
Yes, okay.
I'm gonna write about small things. And then I think, so it's a complex thing, but yeah, but in all of the smaller internal stuff and like working with poetry and just writing more frequently for this art form, I think it is an exercise of imagination, because you get to pay attention to like the moments in everyday life where you're already living in this future transformed world. Like, it's made me pay attention to when I am with my friends and when I am with people I'm in community with and organizing with, how we have moments where we are like there, like we're imagining we're doing it. We're like, so much care, there's so much, everything that I would want in this world. Like, I feel entirely liberated in those moments. And then casting like a real attention to that, I think is important, and important for me to know that, okay, this is possible. It's not some abstract thing that like, we'll have the revolution and then it's like, no, it will be like when you're with your friends and you're all vibing and it's like good, and you all care about each other and you care about people who you don't know well, and you extend care in the form of mutual, you do all of these things naturally. And in those moments, I think it's important to think, this is what we're moving towards. It's not distant, it's like hidden and made like invisible in a lot of ways, but it is happening now in so many places. So
100%. I really agree that. And I think that, it is really easy to relegate, what the future will look like to this kind of unknown place in our mind somewhere ahead. And actually, I think some of the like best spaces that I've been a part of, I was at a conference and they were like, we believe in creating the future we want right here and now. So that idea of like the provision of care and like, community was just so apparent in a way that I hadn't necessarily experienced before. And I think that is important. I think that's important to capture, because that's how we build on it. That's how we name it, and it grows and grows and grows until, the hope is that it overshadows the thing that we're trying to kind of move away from. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. I know we had another question that we were going to discuss around like writing now in this current situation that we all find ourselves in. But I know that there are some questions that are actually so maybe we should look through those. Which, thank you guys. Thank you so much. So yeah, it's amazing. I think Abby had a question first, if I'm correct. So yeah, how do you think academics and health professionals can do this better? So like she says, I really wish we used art, such as poetry, more to communicate climate injustice. How can academics and health professionals use that or do that better? Do you wanna?
Yeah, I think for me, it's as somebody who has worked with, academics and healthcare professionals, for me, I think it works best when there's an understanding that there isn't like this hierarchy of knowledge, which I often find that it really exists and is quite unpleasant. And I think that this idea that, so often I'm called to kind of just like sprinkle a little bit of like, I don't know, just like zhuzh up a talk or whatever, as opposed to actually being somebody who does carry that knowledge, thinking about language, how things are communicating, how is that not on your agenda, right? Like, and I think that's the thing with academia sometimes, when there's all this knowledge and there's not necessarily the conversation about how that knowledge is disseminated and how it is made accessible. And so, to work with artists, whether it's poets or otherwise, is incredibly important, because especially for the issues we're engaged in, it's fundamental. Otherwise it stays within the kind of ivory tower. And so I think it's understanding how, not only the knowledge that you can bring in centrally, but also understanding how artists can translate those messages, can also engage audiences that they, that an academic is not going to have access to. I'm a researcher, and so I really see how what I do in a research way is, and who I can speak to through that research is very different to who I can speak to as a writer. And that's much more of a live conversation. And so that's really powerful. And I just think the more people that know that and bring people on with that understanding, the better.
I completely agree. And like, the only thing I would add is like, also, I mean, thinking about like the work that you do as creative work, like a friend of mine reminded me that like, I think we think about the arts as like our outlet for creative energy. Whereas like, your scholarly practice, I won't even say your life as an academic because whatever, but like what you care about intellectually, you can try and, I think, like take a creative approach to the entire world you build around that, how you move in the spaces you're part of, like you say, how you bring people in, how you interact with, if you have students, if you have supervisors, whatever, and what your aims for that work are. I think thinking of it your work is contributing to a larger project, and that project as a creative project, because we are trying to create this world, like is a big change for me, because it then made me realize like there's not anything to be siloed off. Like I think my poetry and stuff and my interest in writing generally, like, because I'm doing a part-time master's at the moment in global health, and it's definitely so that's my
Great.
definitely made me invest more time in just like shoehorning a poem into any essay I write, and like any seminar, just being like, have you guys read Diane de Prima's Revolutionary Letters? Like every opportunity I have is just an opportunity to make sure people don't I guess like fall back into the language of the academy, which is a language that is like an extension of the state. We have to think of academy as an extension of the state, which they are, in an increasingly marketized world, and an increasingly like less academic, like fewer academic freedoms everywhere. I think we have to think, okay, strategically, how can I steal the resources from the academy and pull it back into the communities I care about and all the causes I care about, bring people into the academic spaces and acknowledge their work, and their knowledge production is like incredible, and just also be working towards the dismantling of all of this stuff, like in the like what I'm saying around like the end to the professionalization of international development. I don't want, in this new world, I don't want any international development professors. I don't want them to exist, because I want them to be obsolete, I want all of that to be gone, not least because a lot of them are insufferable, but like I think all of it is connected, and just thinking of how you move in the world in every space you're in as a professional, whatever, like is the way forward. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant. But...
Oh no, that was great. So yeah, Ben, did you?
I was coming in at 2 minutes to 8.
Okay, great.
And maybe I'm going to end with a final question that Tim has put into the chat as maybe a final short reflection for both of you. Tim has written, poetry allows us to find the connections between so many diverse issues, connections that we often cannot see, which you both like reflected so powerfully in your work. Have either of you been surprised by your own writings in what they reveal or bring to your own personal awareness about things that had been hidden? In a brief 1 minute answer each.
Thanks. Yeah, let's keep it soundbitey. You want to go? I don't mind going, but I don't know.
I'm still thinking. Do you want to go
Okay.
first?
Definitely. I think, this is why I like to teach poetry, because it's therapeutic. And I think there has been research on this as well. It has therapeutic qualities. So, you're talking to yourself, you're talking to the page, you're talking to somebody. And like if you write in a diary, things come up that you don't expect. And so I definitely think that, you know, I've definitely surprised myself, and sometimes it's felt too vulnerable because I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? So I absolutely think that there is that kind of, you know, power and magic within writing poetry. And I think good poems should surprise you both as the writer and as the reader.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a perfect. You should have gone second. That's a perfect I think, yeah, like I'm always surprised. I'm always like, where did that come from? I'm always like, a lot of the time, like weirded out. I think I write a lot in response to dreams as well. So it's very like, this is weird. But it's always a good surprise because it means I feel like through writing, I know myself better, and I know like the boundaries of like who I am and what I think and why I think it to some extent. And I think that's just useful to do because, yeah, it also reveals a lot about your, oh, that's my phone ringing. It was, that's one of my best friends calling me. It also reveals a lot about, what I was going to say, your friendship circles and like how you,
right on time.
I know, it's just the telepathy. Yeah, just like how you I guess are practicing care and practicing all of the things you would like to see again, like in the world, in your community. A lot of the time, like I'll write stuff and I'll be like, oh, that was actually, I didn't think about how this would affect this person or whether this would, you know, have an effect I didn't think about before, or whether saying something in the way that I say something is received in the way that I would receive it to someone else. So just like thinking and being more aware of that is a really good exercise. So yeah, and I'll end there.
Thank you both so much, Sarah and Selina, for just a really wonderful, delicious evening of weaving together the personal and the political, and how, yeah, poetry is a way to imagine that future and to prefigure it and to do it like there and then. And I'm Fazana Khan, which is where I first met Selina a couple of years ago, used the word delicious. So I'm gonna cite Fazana there, but it's a really lovely word to say how wonderful things are. And this was a really wonderful evening. So just thank you so much, Sarah and Selina. You've had so much love in the chat and on the screen. But we'll give one final. You can take your microphones off mute as well, and just a big clap. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. This is so lovely. And Selina, I'm so happy to have a conversation with you.
Oh, lovely. It's nice when Zoom doesn't become a vacuum. So that was lovely to hear some cheering in the background.